Hi guys, Bearbonez here, and this is going to be the first video in a series of videos where I talk about albums that have had an enormous influence on me as a musician, both as a guitar player, a singer, and a lyricist, and how these albums have really influenced how I've kind of learned to fit those things together, if that makes sense. And the first album that I'm going to talk about is Black Star by David Bowie. This is a little bit heavy to start with this album, but it's the one that is I'm listening. It's the one that I'm listening to the most right now. And yeah, this album has a lot of weight to it. Every David Bowie fan knows this was his final album. For those of you that don't know, he found out that he had cancer and kept it to himself while he recorded this album. I don't believe any of the band members were aware of the fact that he was sick. Um, there's an urgency to this album, and it definitely feels like he knew that his time was up, unfortunately, and he was really pushing to get this out there. And he did end up passing away just a couple days after the album was released. So this really was his final gift to the world. He used every second that he had to essentially have the final say on his career, which I thought was really powerful. The tracks on here, I love all of the tracks on here. I'm not going to talk about every single one, but the standout tracks that really spoke to me were the title track, Black Star, which is this really dense, psychedelic, dreamy, jazzy funeral march. And then it launches into this really beautiful, colorful bridge that really, palette-wise, feels like he's drawing from the 80s as well as the 90s, and really kind of in an odd way feels like he's drawing from every era of his career. And that is something that's really interesting to me, is that I feel the presence of the entirety of his career in the sound throughout this album. And he uses it to great effect to kind of create movement in the songs. And specifically with this one, it's really gorgeous when he bursts into the bridge, and it feels joyous in an odd way, but the sounds create a cold atmosphere. So you're always aware of this sort of ominous underbelly that the song has. And obviously that the song begins in a very ominous way. It explodes into this really colorful and intricate bridge, and the chorus is really gorgeous, and then it ends up slipping back into this funeral march. And so I highly recommend checking that out. His lyrics are really fantastic. I mean, I've always loved his lyrics, but in particular, this album has some really gorgeous stuff on it. I think given the seriousness of his situation, he had a lot to say, and not a lot of time to say it. So you end up with some really fantastic lyrics. Um, the second song that I really enjoy would be Lazarus. There's some really beautiful horn arrangements on this song, and it's really funny. I don't think he ever played. I think there was a song that he played saxophone on, but he was a really good saxophone player. But what he would do is he would he would lay down like demo tracks and then have a professional saxophone player come in and then just do what he had written. So he really treated it like he was a composer, and he was self-conscious in that way, which was kind of funny. Like I know that I saw several interviews where he talked about not being satisfied with his voice, and that if he could just be a songwriter and kind of give his songs to other people, if he could do that, he might do that. But I'm really glad he didn't. He has these really long intros and verses on these two songs, on Black Star and Lazarus, that I find really great. He makes you wait. And there are some other songs by other artists that I love for the same reason. I really like it when an artist takes their time and then gives you that payoff. And he's, funny enough, despite the urgency that I mentioned regarding the making of this album, he is incredibly patient when it comes to the composition and the arrangements for these songs. Yeah, what's really interesting to me about the lyrics on a lot of these songs is that they really are kind of surreal and really hard to derive a specific meaning from them. They feel very personal, almost like cut up journal entries in an odd way. I know that Tom York, he's another one of my favorite lyricists, and I know that with Kid A, one of the ways that he got over a hurdle of writer's block was that he just wrote out a bunch of lyrics and then cut them up and kind of rearranged them at random, and then just kind of made something of that, and felt that he was able to breathe life into the material that they were doing for Kid A by creating this word collage essentially. I don't think Bowie did that here, but the way that it reads, it is scattered, which is really interesting and adds to that feeling on the album, this sort of conflicted feeling of being aware essentially of your impending demise, being powerless to stop it, but having an incredibly active mind the whole time, and really working to strike a balance amidst that chaos, essentially. The next song that I really liked was "Girl Loves Me." It was a really fantastic song. Um, the Some of the lyrics included on that song were actually in a dialect created for Clockwork Orange, the book, and then obviously used in A Clockwork Orange, the film done by Stanley Kubrick. Again, one of the lyrics on there is talking about, I think he's saying, "Where the fuck did Monday go?" And this idea of essentially no new beginnings is kind of what I got from that song. But yeah, it's really heavy. It does have kind of oddly enough to my ears, kind of a modern hip hop feel. I know that David Bowie was listening to Kendrick Lamar a lot. I think he was listening to Pimp a Butterfly. But yes, that was really interesting that there was that kind of influence in there. This song's really driven by the drum beat. It has a kind of a hypnotic quality to it. But yeah, the song's really great. And then the last song that I want to talk about is I Can't Give Everything Away. This song has a very 80s vibe to it. So I'm reminded of it's like a darker, it's like his album. So yeah, this song reminds me a lot of Let's Dance, one of David Bowie's most popular albums, specifically from the 80s. It came out in 1983, and it had Let's Dance, which was the title song, China Girl, Modern Love, and then Without You, which I thought was a really, really amazing song. That I think was this was the first album to feature, first and only album actually, where David Bowie collaborated with Stevie Ray Vaughan. So Stevie Ray Vaughan was lending his sweet licks to this album. Anyway, I'm getting a little bit sidetracked. But the point being that, again, like I was saying earlier, that David Bowie was really drawing from the sounds that spanned the entirety of his career in order to make this album. And it really did feel like it was a reflection on both his career and a meditation on his life on a personal level. And it feels really naked in an odd way, lyrically as well as in a production sense. It felt like it was really kind of stripped down at its core. To my ears, it sounds like there are live tracks spread throughout the entirety of the album. And by that I mean that it sounds like that the rhythm section, as well as maybe a rhythm guitar, was played live all the way through each track, so that they had like a drummer, a bass player, and a guitar player all in the same room. They'd lay down a live track through the song, play from beginning to end, and then they'd go in and probably add vocals and the synths and the horns and everything that really rounded out the song would be added in afterwards in a very tasteful way. But that at its core, it sounds very organic. It doesn't sound like they're playing to a click track. It doesn't sound like it was altered with Pro Tools to sound just right. There are some imperfections that you can hear in there. The drums were allowed to breathe on this album. I'm a drummer, so I love that kind of thing. And you really feel the room that the drummer's playing in. Like on Black Star, I can hear mild imperfections in the drums, which it sounds to me almost like I'm sitting next to the drummer as he's playing. So you can hear little squeaks and things like that coming from the drum set as it's being hit, which I personally find really attractive. As opposed to just kind of isolating and compressing each drum track, as you go along, it really kind of sucks the life out of the instrument. Um, I don't want to make this album review or whatever you call this all that dark. Obviously, there was a lot of joy in this album, and I'm so grateful that he left us with this gift before he passed. And I think it's pretty incredible that for someone who was as famous and as successful as he was, he prioritized his music and his art above all else as he was dying. He could have easily gone and retired and just kind of lived the rest of his life in the lap of luxury, probably from the 80s on. He didn't actually have to make anything anymore. So you know that music was really important to him if that's how he spent his final hours. And so I'm incredibly grateful to him for that. And I wanted to do a video talking about it and what it meant to me. Things that I learned from this album and I've really taken to heart with a lot of my newer stuff is allowing the instruments to breathe. I've really tried to do more live tracks from beginning to end. I've started recording my vocals from end to end, and then if there's little things that I have to fix, I might do that. I re-record certain parts, but really doing my best to create an organic atmosphere with my music now. Nowadays, it's really popular to kind of micromanage the sound when we're recording stuff. I know not everyone watching this is necessarily like even a musician or a recording artist, but there's definitely a trend nowadays to micromanage your sound, isolate every sound, make sure everything sounds really, really perfect, and as a result, it can sound really kind of robotic. I've also branched out a lot more with jazz chords, and then trying to work in a more simplistic way to get more out of the chord progressions that you come up with. I know that when I wrote Soft Waves, which was actually after Black Star came out, that's 4 chords. That's a 4-chord song. And I got a verse, a chorus, a solo riff out of it. You can get a lot more out of your music if you don't stifle it by just adding too much or robbing it of the natural sound that it has when you play it. Well, thank you so much for watching. I hope you guys liked the video. I'm going to be doing these a couple times a week. I have a lot of albums to talk about. Like I said, I learned music mostly by ear and learning the songs of the artists that I loved. So I look forward to seeing you guys again, and don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you soon.